My name is Colton, and I am 32 years old. Working as a professional photographer in Boston. I used to be close with my controlling parents until tensions grew over my life. Choices and pursuit of independence. One day, my world stopped when I received a text from my mother saying, "Locks changed. You do not have a home anymore." I responded defiantly, "How funny how brave they think they are, haha." Little did I know that 2 days later, I would receive an urgent email from their lawyer. "We have a problem. Call immediately." Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever stood up for yourself against family pressure. I grew up in Brookline, an affluent suburb just outside of Boston. Our neighborhood was filled with sprawling estates, perfectly manicured lawns, and families who projected success and perfection at all costs. My father, Richard, was a successful investment banker who worked 60-hour weeks and expected nothing less than excellence from everyone around him, especially his only son. My mother, Karen, was a perfectionist who micromanaged every aspect of our family life. From the meals we ate, to the clothes we wore, to the friends we were allowed to have, my childhood memories are filled with the pressure to achieve. Perfect report cards were not celebrated but expected. Anything less than an A was met with disappointment and additional tutoring sessions. My activities were carefully chosen, not based on my interests, but on what would look best on future college applications. Piano lessons, tennis club, debate team, prestigious summer camps. I had no say in any of it. Colton. Appearance is everything. My mother would remind me whenever I questioned why I could not just play video games with neighborhood kids or take art classes instead of another advanced math course. People judge our entire family based on how you present yourself. My father was more direct in his approach. "The Davis family has a reputation to uphold," he would say, his voice firm and unyielding. "One day, you will thank us for pushing you towards success." High school was particularly difficult. While I was forced to take business track classes and join investment clubs, I secretly harbored a passion for photography. I had discovered this interest during my sophomore year when I found an old film camera in our attic, likely belonging to some distant relative. In stolen moments between my scheduled activities, I would wander around capturing images that spoke to me. Light filtering through tree branches, the weathered hands of our elderly gardener, abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. Photography became my secret refuge, the one thing in my life that was truly mine. I kept my camera hidden in my locker at school and only developed photos at a small shop across town where no one would recognize me. Looking back, it seems extreme, but I knew my parents would see my artistic interests as a distraction from the path they had meticulously planned for me. The first major conflict erupted when I was 18 and preparing college applications. I wanted to study photography at Rhode Island School of Design. But when I tentatively mentioned this dream to my parents during dinner, my father actually laughed, thinking I was joking. "You will study business at Harvard, just like I did," he stated, as if it had been decided since my birth. Which, in his mind, it probably had been. When he realized I was serious, his amusement turned to anger. Photography is a hobby, not a career. No son of mine is going to waste his potential taking pictures when he could be building a real future. My mother, always the negotiator, suggested, "Why not minor in photography, if you must? But your primary focus needs to be practical." Their ultimatum was clear: pursue a business degree, or receive no financial support for college. At 18, without resources of my own, and unprepared to break away completely, I compromised. I attended Boston University, majored in business administration with a photography minor, and continued to live at home to save money, all while silently resenting their control over my life. College opened my eyes in unexpected ways. Not just through photography classes that validated my passion, but through psychology courses that helped me understand the unhealthy dynamics in my family. I learned about controlling behaviors, emotional manipulation, and conditional love. I began to see that what I had accepted as normal parenting was actually harmful control. As I met other students with supportive families who encouraged their individual dreams, the contrast became increasingly painful. Some parents drove hours to attend their children's art shows or music performances. My parents never once came to see my photography exhibitions, despite them being held just minutes from our home. During these formative years, I started to develop a sense of self, separate from my parents' expectations. I made friends who appreciated me for who I was, not for my family name or potential business connections. I dated casually, discovering my attraction to both women and men, something I knew would never be accepted at home. I kept these parts of myself carefully hidden, maintaining a facade of compliance, while secretly planning my eventual independence. By senior year, I was living a double life. At home, I was the dutiful son studying business, dressing appropriately for family functions, and nodding along to my father's lectures about networking opportunities. In my other life, I was building a portfolio, entering photography contests, and developing my own artistic voice. The strain of this division was taking its toll. But graduation was approaching, and with it, I hoped, would come freedom. Little did I know how difficult breaking free would actually be, or how fiercely my parents would fight to maintain their control over my life choices. The stage was being set for a conflict that would ultimately force me to choose between my authentic self and my family's approval. I graduated with a business degree I never wanted, walking across the stage to receive my diploma, while feeling nothing but emptiness inside. My parents hosted an elaborate graduation party, inviting all their friends and business associates to celebrate what they saw as the first step in my journey to following in my father's footsteps. "We have already arranged an entry-level position for you at Hamilton Financial," my father announced proudly during his toast. Hamilton Financial was owned by his college roommate, Robert Hamilton, and was considered a prestigious starting point for aspiring financial analysts. I smiled and thanked him, swallowing my protests along with the expensive champagne. 2 weeks later, I started at Hamilton Financial. My days were filled with spreadsheets, market analyses, and client meetings that left me feeling hollow and disconnected. I would stare at the clock, counting minutes until I could escape. Weekends became my salvation. I would grab my camera and disappear for hours, capturing images around Boston that made me feel alive again. During one of these weekend photography sessions, I met Lucas, a graphic designer who noticed me photographing an abandoned industrial building. "You have a great eye," he said, glancing at my camera screen. "Do you show your work anywhere?" That conversation led to my first connection with Boston's vibrant artistic community. Lucas introduced me to other photographers, gallery owners, and creative professionals who recognized talent without caring about family names or business connections. For the first time, I felt seen for who I really was. While building my photography portfolio on weekends, I was also secretly saving money. Preparing for the day I would break free from my parents' expectations. After 2 years at Hamilton Financial, I had enough saved to support myself for 6 months. I practiced my resignation speech for weeks before finally working up the courage to deliver it. Mr. Hamilton seemed genuinely disappointed. "Your father will not be pleased," he warned. "Are you sure you want to throw away such a promising career?" I was sure. The next conversation with my parents was exactly as difficult as I had anticipated. We were having our mandatory Sunday dinner when I broke the news. "I quit Hamilton Financial today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am going to pursue photography full-time." My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is how you repay us for everything we have done for you?" he demanded. "By throwing away a perfect opportunity to follow some childish fantasy?" "It is not a fantasy," I insisted. "I already have some clients lined up, and I have saved enough to get started." "Clients?" my father scoffed. "Taking senior portraits and wedding photos is not a career, Colton." My mother, always more strategic, took a different approach. "We only want what is best for you, darling. If you need to get this out of your system, fine. But we will not fund this rebellion." "I am not asking you to," I replied, which seemed to surprise them. True to their word, my parents immediately cut off the financial support they had continued to provide after college. My mother canceled the credit card they had given me for emergencies. My father called to inform me I was no longer covered under their health insurance plan. It was their way of forcing me back into compliance, assuming I would come crawling back when faced with real-world financial pressures. Those first months as a freelance photographer were challenging. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Somerville that I could barely afford. I took any photography job I could find, from product shots for small businesses to event photography. I ate ramen noodles and worked 18-hour days. But despite the struggles, I felt more authentic and alive than I ever had in my corporate cubicle. My breakthrough came 6 months in, when an up-and-coming tech company hired me for their rebranding campaign. The project paid well and led to more corporate clients who appreciated my unique aesthetic. Suddenly, I was not just surviving, but thriving. When I called my mother to share my success, her response was dismissive. "That is nice, honey. I am sure this phase is very exciting for you." The subtext was clear. She was just waiting for me to fail and return to the path they had chosen. My father was more direct during our next uncomfortable family dinner. "Good to hear your hobby is bringing in some money," he said with a condescending smile. "But there is still time to return to a real career. Robert said he would consider taking you back at Hamilton Financial." These Sunday dinners had become battlegrounds of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled disappointment. My mother would interrogate me about my social life, dropping hints about the daughters of their friends, who were such lovely girls and from good families. My father would lecture me about financial security and retirement planning, as if I was living recklessly rather than building a business I was passionate about. Things became even more tense when I met Mark, the owner of a small but respected gallery in the South End. We connected immediately, both professionally and personally. He was the first person to give me a solo exhibition, believing in my work when few others did. Our professional relationship quickly evolved into something more. Mark was everything my parents would disapprove of: creative, free-spirited, and male. I knew introducing him to my family would cause an explosion, but I was tired of hiding who I was to please them. When I mentioned him at dinner, referring to him as the guy I am dating, my mother nearly choked on her wine. "The man you are what?" she asked, as if she had misheard. My father ignored the comment entirely, immediately changing the subject to my cousin's recent promotion. It was as if I had not spoken at all. In subsequent weeks, they referred to Mark exclusively as my friend or business associate, refusing to acknowledge the nature of our relationship. When I corrected them, they would simply talk over me or abruptly shift topics. As both my photography career and relationship with Mark flourished, I gradually reduced contact with my family. The constant criticism and dismissal of my choices became too draining to endure regularly. I began declining some Sunday dinners, citing work commitments. I shortened phone calls with my mother. I started establishing boundaries that would have been unthinkable in my younger years. My parents interpreted these boundaries as further rebellion rather than healthy independence. The tension continued to build, setting the stage for the confrontation that would ultimately change everything. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary arrived with the expected pomp and circumstance. They rented out the grand ballroom at the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel in downtown Boston, inviting over 200 guests, including extended family, business associates, and Boston's social elite. The invitation arrived at my apartment on heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing, followed by my mother's phone call, reminding me that attendance was absolutely mandatory and that I should wear the navy suit she had bought me last Christmas. "And Colton," she added just before hanging up, "I think it would be best if you came alone. This is a family celebration after all." Her meaning was clear. Mark was not welcome. After a lengthy discussion with him, we decided to attend together anyway. By this point, we had been dating for over a year, and I was done pretending he was not an important part of my life. The night of the anniversary party, Mark and I arrived together. He looked stunning in a charcoal gray suit, his confidence apparent as we entered the ballroom. My mother spotted us immediately, her smile freezing as she registered Mark's presence. She glided over, greeting me with an air kiss, before turning to Mark with a tight smile. "How nice of Colton's friend to join us," she said, emphasizing the word friend while avoiding eye contact with him. "Though I do believe we discussed this being a family event." "Mark is family to me," I replied firmly. and he was kind enough to be my +1 for the evening. My father joined us, shaking my hand formally before nodding curtly at Mark. Colton, there are several people you should speak with tonight. Business contacts that could be useful for when you are ready to return to a proper career. The pattern continued throughout the evening. My parents introduced Mark as Colton's friend from the art world to anyone who asked, maintaining the fiction that we were merely acquaintances. I corrected them repeatedly, but they simply talked over me or moved the conversation in another direction. The one bright spot was my Aunt Patricia, my father's younger sister, who had always been something of a family rebel herself. She sought us out during cocktail hour, genuinely interested in getting to know Mark and asking thoughtful questions about our relationship. "I saw your recent gallery showing online," she told me, squeezing my arm affectionately. "The Urban Decay series was powerful, Colton. You have real talent." Her authentic support felt like cool water in a desert, highlighting how parched I had been for family validation. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, recognizing how much her words meant to me. The breaking point came during my father's anniversary speech. After the expected tributes to my mother and their marriage, he unexpectedly turned the focus to family legacy. "Karen and I are proud of the family we have built and the values we have instilled," he said, glass raised. "And we are excited to announce that our son Colton will be joining Davis Investment Group as our new Director of Client Relations next month, continuing our family tradition of excellence in financial services." The room erupted in applause while I sat frozen in shock. This was the first I had heard of any such position. My father had not discussed this with me at all. Mark tensed beside me, sensing my distress. As guests approached to congratulate me after the speech, I mechanically thanked them, too stunned to correct the misunderstanding. My father beamed across the room, clearly believing he had outmaneuvered me by announcing the position publicly, making it difficult for me to decline without causing a scene. When the crowd dispersed, I immediately sought him out, finding him near the bar with several business associates. "Could I speak with you privately?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. "Anything you need to say can be said here," he replied confidently. "We are all family friends." "Fine," I said, beyond caring about appearances. "I am not joining Davis Investment Group. I never agreed to that position. My photography career is going well, and that is what I am continuing to pursue." His smile tightened. "Do not be ridiculous, Colton. This rebellious phase has gone on long enough. It is time to grow up and take your rightful place in the family business." "It is not a phase," I insisted. "Photography is my career, not a hobby. I have major clients, gallery representations, and a business that is growing every month." My mother appeared at my father's side, sensing the tension. "Perhaps this is not the appropriate venue for this discussion," she said quietly. "You are right," my father conceded, lowering his voice. "We should not air family matters publicly. We will discuss your position at the firm tomorrow." "There is nothing to discuss," I replied. "I am not taking the job. I need you both to respect that I have chosen a different path." My mother's pleasant mask slipped. "A path that includes embarrassing lifestyle choices and throwing away your potential," she hissed, glancing meaningfully toward Mark, who was chatting with my Aunt Patricia across the room. "My relationship with Mark is not a lifestyle choice," I said, feeling heat rise to my face. "And my career is not a waste of potential. I am successful doing what I love." "Taking pictures is not success," my father interjected. "It is playing around while avoiding real responsibility. We have tolerated this long enough." Our voices had risen, drawing attention from nearby guests. My mother plastered on a smile for their benefit, while whispering furiously, "You are making a scene at our anniversary, Colton. This is completely inappropriate." Mark noticed the confrontation and made his way to my side, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. My father's expression darkened at the gesture. "This is exactly the problem," he said, gesturing dismissively toward Mark. "These influences pulling you away from your family obligations." Mark stepped forward. "With all due respect, sir, Colton is an accomplished photographer who has built a successful business through talent and hard work. That deserves recognition, not dismissal." My father turned to Mark with cold fury. I do not recall asking for input from my son's roommate, he said. The euphemism, deliberate and cutting, something snapped inside me. Years of suppressed frustration and hurt burst forth like a dam breaking. He is not my roommate. He is my partner. And you know it. Stop pretending otherwise. I turned to address the small crowd that had gathered around us. And while we are clearing things up, I will not be joining Davis Investment Group. I am a professional photographer with clients, including Tech Innovate, Boston Medical Group, and Coastal Luxury Properties. My work was featured in last month's Design Quarterly. AT. When end of 70, the career you keep dismissing as a hobby pays my bills and fulfills me in ways that pushing papers at your firm never could. My mother grabbed my arm. Colton, that is enough, she warned. I gently removed her hand. No, it is not enough. For years I have tried to be the son you wanted while still being true to myself. I have attended your dinners, listened to your criticism, and endured your dismissal of my choices. But I cannot do it anymore. I will not sacrifice my happiness or pretend to be someone I am not to please you. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. If that is how you feel, perhaps we should reevaluate our relationship, he said coldly. Perhaps we should. I agreed, suddenly feeling lighter. Despite the tension, it was then that my father made the statement that would change everything. If you walk out of here with him, he said, nodding toward Mark, do not expect to remain part of this family. We have standards, Colton, expectations, and you are failing to meet them in every possible way. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. In that moment, I saw my parents clearly, perhaps for the first time. Their love had always been conditional, dependent on my compliance with their vision for my life. I am walking out with Mark, I said calmly, not to spite you, but because I respect myself too much to stay where I am not accepted for who I am. I took Mark's hand openly. Thank you for a lovely anniversary celebration, I said formally. Congratulations on 35 years together. As we walked toward the exit, my Aunt Patricia caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod of approval. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. Mark and I left the Fairmont and stepped into the cool Boston night, neither of us speaking until we were several blocks away. Finally, he pulled me into an embrace on the sidewalk. Are you okay? He asked softly. Not really, I admitted. But I think I will be. What I did not know then was that the confrontation at the anniversary party was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. 2 weeks passed without any contact from my parents. I threw myself into preparations for my upcoming gallery exhibition, trying to channel my emotional turmoil into my work. Mark was supportive but concerned, often finding me awake at 3 a.m. editing photos or rearranging exhibition layouts. They will come around, he would say, though I could tell he did not entirely believe it himself. I was in my studio finalizing print selections when the text arrived. The message preview on my phone showed my mother's name and the beginning of a text that made my stomach drop. Locks changed. You do not have a home anymore. With shaking hands, I opened the full message. Locks changed. You do not have a home anymore. Your father and I have decided that until you recommit to family values and appropriate life choices, you are no longer welcome in our home. Your behavior at the anniversary was the final straw. I stared at the screen, feeling as though I had been physically struck. Despite everything, some part of me had held on to the hope that we could eventually find middle ground. This text obliterated that hope. My first instinct was to call my mother, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried my father next, who answered but spoke with chilling formality. There is nothing to discuss, Colton. Your mother's message was quite clear. When you are ready to rejoin the family properly, we can revisit the situation. Rejoin properly. Meaning what exactly? I demanded, my voice cracking despite my efforts to remain composed. Pretend I am straight? Abandon my career? What is the price of admission to remain your son? Do not be dramatic, he replied coldly. You know what is expected. The choice is yours. Then, he hung up. I sat immobile for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Then, with a surge of defiance masking my pain, I typed my response. How funny how brave they think they are. Ha. The false bravado of my text belied the turmoil I felt inside. My hands were still trembling when Mark arrived at the studio an hour later. One look at my face told him something was wrong. They have changed the locks, I said, showing him the text exchange. Officially disowned me, I guess. Mark read the messages, his expression darkening with each word. This is beyond toxic, he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. I am so sorry. Colton, no one deserves to be rejected by their parents for being themselves. That night, I barely slept. The finality of my mother's message kept replaying in my mind. Though I had been living independently for years, there had always been the knowledge that my childhood home remained accessible, that some form of connection remained intact despite our differences. Now that connection had been severed completely. The next morning, I called my younger sister Emily, who still maintained regular contact with our parents. Her voice was hushed when she answered, as if afraid of being overheard. I was going to call you, she said. Things are crazy here. So you know about the locks? Yes. And more, she confirmed. They have packed up all your remaining things from your old room in the attic. Everything is in boxes in the garage. What are they telling people? I asked. Emily hesitated. That is the worst part. They are saying you are having some kind of mental health crisis, that you have fallen in with a bad crowd who are taking advantage of you. I felt physically ill. They are literally trying to erase me rather than acknowledge who I actually am. I know it is awful, Emily said, her voice sympathetic but cautious. I am trying to stay neutral here, Colton. I cannot afford to be cut off too. I understood her position but felt the additional sting of her unwillingness to openly support me. Another loss in an expanding circle of family rejection. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I alternated between numbing shock, intense anger, and overwhelming sadness. Friends rallied around me, offering support and practical help. My apartment became a gathering place for impromptu dinners and movie nights. My chosen family stepping in to fill the void left by my biological one. Mark was a constant presence, steady and unwavering in his support. Your parents think they are punishing you, he observed one evening as we walked along the Charles River. But all they are doing is revealing the conditional nature of their love. I nodded, watching the sunset reflect on the water. The irony is that my exhibition is partly about belonging and identity. Now I have even more material to work with. The exhibition, titled Fragments, was scheduled to open in 10 days at Mark's gallery. I had been working on it for months, creating a series of images exploring disconnection and reintegration in urban environments. In the wake of my family's rejection, the work took on deeper personal significance. I channeled my emotional turmoil into final preparations, staying up late making minute adjustments to prints and agonizing over sequence and placement. The physical work provided some relief from the constant replay of my parents' rejection. This could be the best thing that ever happened to your art, suggested my friend Zach, another photographer, as he helped me hang the final pieces. Some of the greatest work comes from pain. I would rather have mediocre art and functional family relationships, I replied. Only half joking. As the exhibition opening approached, I began to accept that the break with my family might be permanent. My parents had made their position clear, and I was unwilling to deny my authentic self to regain their approval. Though the pain remained acute, I was starting to envision a future built entirely on my own terms, without the constant shadow of their disapproval. What I could not have anticipated was the email that arrived just 2 days before the exhibition opening, throwing everything into question once again. The opening night of Fragments exceeded all expectations. The gallery was packed with art lovers, critics, fellow photographers, and friends who had come to show support. 3 pieces sold within the first hour, including the centerpiece of the collection, a large format print titled Threshold that captured an abandoned doorway overgrown with wildflowers. light spilling through the broken frame. Critics from Boston Arts Monthly and The Cultural Lens were in attendance, both expressing interest in featuring the exhibition in upcoming issues. Mark beamed with pride as he introduced me to various collectors and gallery owners, solidifying my place in Boston's competitive art scene. "Tonight is a triumph," he whispered during a brief quiet moment. "And not just artistically. You stood your ground, and look what you have created." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of professional satisfaction and personal sadness. The absence of my family was a palpable void amid the celebration. Despite everything, some childish part of me had harbored a secret hope that they might show up, that seeing my success might change their perspective. The morning after the successful opening, I was still riding the emotional high of professional validation when an email arrived from a familiar address. William Thornton, my parents' longtime attorney. The subject line made my heart race. Urgent. Family legal matter. Requiring immediate attention. The body of the email was brief and cryptic. "We have a problem. Call immediately." I stared at the screen, a swirl of emotions churning through me. Part of me wanted to delete the message without response, a small revenge for my parents' rejection, but curiosity and a lingering sense of connection overrode my resentment. Mark found me still staring at the laptop. "What is it?" he asked. Noting my expression, I showed him the email. "Their lawyer. I am not sure whether to respond or not." Mark considered for a moment. "It could be another manipulation tactic," he suggested. "But it might be worth finding out what this is about. Whatever you decide, I will support you." After much deliberation, I decided to call Thornton's office, preparing myself for another painful interaction related to my parents. The receptionist put me through immediately, suggesting the matter was indeed urgent. "Colton, thank you for returning my call promptly," Thornton began, his tone more respectful than I had anticipated. "We have a situation that requires your attention regarding your grandfather's estate and trust." "My grandfather?" I echoed, confused. My paternal grandfather had passed away when I was in college, leaving most of his considerable estate to my father. "What does this have to do with me?" "It has come to my attention that certain actions taken recently may be in violation of the terms of your grandfather's trust," he explained carefully. "Specifically regarding the family home." "The locks," I said, suddenly understanding. "This is about them changing the locks and barring me from the house." "Precisely," Thornton confirmed. "You see, when your grandfather established his trust, he placed the family home in a specific legal arrangement that named both your father and you as beneficiaries. This was news to me. I was never told I had any legal interest in the house." "Yes, well," Thornton cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your father preferred to manage the trust matters privately, but the fact remains that according to the legal documents, the house is held in trust with the explicit condition that all named beneficiaries must have access to the property." I sat down, trying to process this information. "So when they changed the locks and told me I no longer had a home there, they violated the terms of the trust," Thornton finished, "which puts the entire arrangement in jeopardy. If these conditions are breached, there are significant consequences, including the potential forced sale of the property with proceeds distributed according to the original trust percentages." "They could lose the house?" I asked, stunned by this unexpected leverage. "Not just the house," Thornton continued. "Your grandfather was quite thorough. The trust includes several properties and investment accounts. All could be affected by this breach of conditions." I was silent for a moment, trying to absorb the implications. Why would my grandfather set things up this way? Thornton's voice softened slightly. "Your grandfather was a shrewd man who understood family dynamics. He specifically mentioned wanting to protect the interests of future generations from, as he put it, short-sighted emotional decisions. It appears he anticipated potential family conflicts. The irony was almost too much. My grandfather, whom I had always viewed as even more traditional than my father, had created a safety net that was now protecting me from my parents' rejection. What happens now? I asked. That largely depends on you, Thornton replied. As the injured party in this breach of trust conditions, you have several options. We should meet in person to discuss them, preferably with your own legal representation present. After ending the call, I sat in stunned silence. Mark waited patiently for me to process before asking, "What was that about?" I explained the situation, still trying to wrap my head around this unexpected turn of events. Apparently, I legally cannot be locked out of the house. And if they persist, they could lose everything. "That is quite the plot twist," Mark said, raising his eyebrows. "What are you going to do?" It was a good question. The revelation gave me significant legal leverage over my parents, an unexpected power shift in our relationship. I could force them to give me access to the house, potentially even compel them to sell it and collect my share of the proceeds. "I need to think," I said, "and probably talk to a lawyer of my own." The next day, I consulted with Andrea Ramirez, an attorney specializing in estate law who had no connection to my family. She confirmed everything Thornton had told me and outlined my options in detail. "Your grandfather created what we call a protective trust," she explained. "These are specifically designed to prevent beneficiaries from being disinherited or excluded through emotional family disputes. Based on the documents you have shared, you have a very strong position legally. I do not want revenge," I told her honestly. "I just want them to acknowledge that they cannot erase me from existence because they disapprove of my life." Andrea nodded thoughtfully. "Then we use this as leverage for establishing new boundaries, not as a weapon. I would suggest a formal meeting with all parties present, where we can establish clear terms moving forward." As I left her office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing my parents' attempt to reject me had backfired so dramatically. But there was also sadness that it had come to this, that legal documents and threats were now the language of our family relationship. Mark met me for lunch afterward, listening attentively as I described my conversation with Andrea. "What are you hoping will come from this?" he asked gently. I considered the question carefully. "Not money. Not the house itself. Just acknowledgement of my right to exist on my own terms, without being cut out of the family completely." "Do you think they can ever truly accept you? Accept us?" he pressed. "I do not know," I admitted. "But I think this situation forces a conversation that might otherwise never happen. They cannot simply pretend I do not exist when there are legal consequences at stake." That evening, I emailed Thornton agreeing to a meeting, with the condition that my own attorney would be present. His response came quickly, with a proposed date just 3 days later. The wheels were in motion for a confrontation I had never anticipated, one where, for perhaps the first time, I would not be at a disadvantage with my parents. As I prepared for the meeting, I realized something important had shifted within me. The desperate need for my parents' approval that had dominated so much of my life had been replaced by something else. A desire for respect, if not understanding. I was no longer the child seeking validation, but an adult requiring recognition of my autonomy. Whatever happened at the meeting, I knew I would never again sacrifice my authentic self to please them. The question now was whether they could accept this new reality, or if our relationship was truly beyond repair. The law offices of Thornton and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown tower with views of Boston Harbor. I arrived early with Andrea, my palms sweating despite her reassurances about our strong legal position. "Remember," she said as we waited in the conference room, "stay calm, regardless of what they say. Emotional reactions will only undermine our position." I nodded, taking deep breaths and reminding myself that I was no longer the powerless child desperate for approval. The balance had shifted, and while I took no pleasure in the circumstances, I recognized the opportunity they presented. When my parents entered with Thornton, the tension was immediate and palpable. My mother looked as perfectly put together as always, though I noticed new lines of stress around her eyes. My father's face was a mask of barely contained anger, his jaw clenched as he took a seat across from me without offering a greeting. Thornton began the meeting with practiced formality, outlining the purpose of our gathering and the legal issues at hand. Andrea interjected occasionally to clarify points or emphasize my position. Throughout this preliminary discussion, my parents remained silent, my father staring fixedly at a point just above my head, my mother's eyes darting between the attorneys, and occasionally, briefly, to me. To summarize, Thornton concluded. The terms of the trust established by Gerald Davis clearly state that all named beneficiaries must have unrestricted access to the family properties. The recent actions taken to change locks and explicitly bar Colton from the premises constitute a clear violation of these terms. This is ridiculous, my father finally erupted. My father never intended for his home to be open to just anyone, regardless of their behavior or choices. Andrea leaned forward slightly. With respect, Mr. Davis, the legal documents make no mention of behavioral conditions or lifestyle approvals. The terms are quite straightforward regarding access rights. What exactly are you hoping to gain from this, Colton? My mother asked, speaking directly to me for the first time. Her voice carried its usual note of controlled disappointment. Money? The house? Is this how you repay us for everything we have provided? I took a deep breath, remembering Andrea's advice to remain calm. I am not looking to take anything from you. I simply want acknowledgement that you cannot legally cut me out of the family because you disapprove of who I am. Who you are, my father repeated with a scoff. You mean your lifestyle choices and career distractions, Richard, Thornton warned. I advise against characterizations that could be interpreted as discriminatory. The legal situation is clear. Regardless of personal opinions, my father's face flushed darker. So what exactly are the consequences if we maintain our position? He demanded. Thornton looked uncomfortable. As I explained previously, a continued breach of trust conditions would trigger several remedies, including potential forced sale of the property with proceeds distributed according to trust percentages. Additionally, it could impact other assets held in the trust, including the Cape Cod property and certain investment portfolios. The color drained from my mother's face. The Cape House too? But that has been in the family for generations. All properties held in trust are subject to the same conditions, Thornton confirmed. A heavy silence fell over the room as my parents absorbed the full implications of their situation. The leverage I held was substantial, affecting not just their primary residence, but vacation properties and investments as well. It was clear from their expressions that they had not fully grasped the extent of their vulnerability until this moment. So what do you want? My father finally asked, his voice tight with constrained anger. What are your demands? Andrea looked to me, indicating it was time to present our proposed resolution. I straightened in my chair, meeting my father's gaze directly. I want 3 things, I stated clearly. First, legal recognition of my rights as established in grandfather's trust, including access to the family properties. Second, an end to attempts to damage my reputation or interfere with my career. And third, respect for my personal life and relationships, including Mark's presence at family events should I choose to attend them. That is completely unreason, my father began. But my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. And in return? She asked pragmatically. In return, I will not pursue any action that would force the sale of properties or liquidation of trust assets, I replied. I have no interest in destroying family legacy or creating financial hardship. I simply want the dignity of being treated as an adult, making my own legitimate choices. My parents exchanged a long look, some silent communication passing between them. We need time to discuss this privately, my father finally said. Thornton nodded. That seems reasonable. Why do not we take 30 minutes? There is a smaller conference room you can use. As my parents left with Thornton, Andrea gave me an approving nod. You handled that very well, she said. Clear, reasonable demands, without emotional escalation. The 30 minutes stretched to nearly an hour before my parents returned. My father looked resigned, my mother carefully composed as they took their seats again. We are prepared to agree to your terms with certain conditions, my father stated formally. Access to properties as legally required, no interference with your career choices, and civil treatment of market family functions you both attend. Our conditions, my mother continued, are that family events remain respectful and appropriate for all attendees, including younger family members and our social circle, and that discussions of certain personal matters be kept private rather than made into public statements. I considered their counterproposal. It was essentially agreement to my terms with face-saving language about appropriate behavior, likely meant to limit public displays of affection between Mark and me at family gatherings. It was not perfect, but it was more than I had expected them to concede. I can agree to normal standards of public behavior that would apply to any couple, I clarified. The same boundaries that would apply to Emily and her husband, for instance. My mother's lips tightened slightly at the explicit comparison, but she nodded. That would be acceptable. Thornton and Andrea worked together to draft a formal agreement, capturing the terms we had discussed. The document was largely unnecessary from a legal perspective, as the original trust already established my rights, but it provided clarity and a reference point for our new understanding. As we signed the agreement, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in having stood my ground and achieved formal recognition of my rights. But there was also sadness that our relationship had deteriorated to the point where legal documents and attorneys were necessary to establish basic respect. When the signing was complete, an awkward silence fell over the room. The legal matter was resolved, but the emotional breach remained vast and largely unaddressed. I should get back to the gallery, I said, standing to leave. We have a critic from New York coming to see the exhibition this afternoon. Your show, my mother said hesitantly. Is it going well? The question caught me off guard, the first expression of even peripheral interest in my career in years. Yes, I replied. Very well. Actually, several pieces have sold, and there's interest from some national publications. She nodded, a flicker of something like pride quickly suppressed. That's good to hear. It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall of disapproval they had built around my choices. As Andrea and I left the building, she congratulated me on the outcome. This is a significant win, Colton. They've been forced to acknowledge your autonomy in a binding way. It doesn't feel much like winning, I admitted. More like establishing a ceasefire in a war that never should have happened. Family reconciliations take time, she said, kindly. This is just the first step. You've created the conditions where healing might eventually be possible. I wasn't sure if she was right, if any real healing was possible given the deep divide in our values and perspectives. But at least now there was a framework for coexistence, a recognition that they could not simply erase me from the family narrative because I didn't fit their preferred script. As I walked back to the gallery where Mark was waiting, I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was resolved, or because I expected my parents to suddenly embrace my life choices, but because I had stood firm in my truth and found strength I hadn't known I possessed. Whatever came next, I would face it as my authentic self, no longer seeking approval I might never receive, but demanding the basic respect that was rightfully mine. 1 year passed, bringing changes I could never have anticipated that day in Thornton's office. My photography career flourished beyond my expectations, with a prestigious international award and features in major publications, including National Geographic and The New Yorker. I established a small studio in South Boston, where I both worked and taught occasional workshops for aspiring photographers. Perhaps the most meaningful project to emerge from the family conflict was the Creation Foundation, a nonprofit I founded to support LGBTQ+ youth who had been rejected by their families. Using a portion of my earnings, and with Mark's organizational expertise, we provided emergency housing assistance, legal aid, and creative arts therapy programs. Transforming my own pain into support for others became an unexpected source of healing. My relationship with my parents evolved slowly and imperfectly. The first few months after our legal agreement were characterized by stiff, formal interactions, limited to necessary communications about family matters. The annual Davis family Christmas gathering was particularly tense, with my parents introducing Mark with correct but cold politeness, and many relatives unsure how to navigate the new dynamic. The first real shift came 4 months after our legal confrontation, when my mother called unexpectedly one evening. "I saw your photograph in Boston Magazine," she said, without preamble. "The one of the old theater, being demolished." "Yes," I replied cautiously, unsure where the conversation was heading. "It was quite moving," she continued, sounding almost reluctant to offer the compliment. The contrast between the elegance of the architecture and the destruction. It made me feel something. It was the first genuine acknowledgement of my work she had ever offered, unaccompanied by suggestions that I return to a real career or dismissal of photography as merely a hobby. "Thank you," I said simply, not wanting to overreact and scare off this fragile new connection. "Your father and I were wondering if perhaps you and Mark might join us for dinner next week," she added. "At Castello's, not at the house." Neutral territory, I suppose you could say. That first dinner was uncomfortable. Conversation stilted and carefully avoiding any potentially controversial topics. But it was a beginning. More surprising was my father's gradual shift. It began with a grudging respect after he discovered that several of his business associates had commissioned me for corporate photography projects and praised my professionalism. "Anderson mentioned you did work for his company," he commented during our third dinner out. "Said you were very thorough, very detail-oriented." Coming from my father, this constituted high praise indeed. 6 months into our fragile new relationship, I suggested we try meeting at the family home for the first time since the confrontation. My mother agreed with visible nervousness, clearly concerned about how the visit would go. Walking into my childhood home felt surreal. Some things had changed, furniture rearranged and new art on the walls. But the essential character remained the same. What had changed more profoundly was my relationship to the space. I no longer felt diminished by it. No longer the child desperate for approval within these walls. "Would you like to see what I have done with the garden?" my mother asked, clearly eager to move past the awkwardness of my re-entry into their home. As we walked the grounds, she spoke more freely than she had in years, discussing her plans for new plantings and the challenges of the unusually dry summer. It was ordinary conversation, but meaningful in its normality. Mark and I announced our engagement 8 months after the legal resolution. Telling my parents was a moment I approached with trepidation, unsure whether this milestone would trigger renewed rejection. My mother received the news with careful neutrality. "When are you thinking of having the ceremony?" she asked, focusing on logistics rather than emotions. My father was more direct. "Will this be a legal marriage?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Massachusetts has had marriage equality for years now." He nodded, absorbing this information. "I suppose we should mark the date in our calendar then." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was acceptance of a sort. They attended the wedding, sitting stiffly in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes once or twice during the ceremony, while my father maintained his stoic facade. They left early during the reception, but they had come. It was more than I had once thought possible. Throughout this period of cautious reconciliation, I continued working with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and reconciliation. Dr. Winters helped me navigate the complex emotions that surfaced as my relationship with my parents evolved, teaching me to maintain boundaries while remaining open to healing. "Remember," she would remind me, "reconciliation doesn't mean returning to old patterns. It means creating a new relationship with clear boundaries and mutual respect." With her guidance, I learned to distinguish between conditional and unconditional love, to recognize manipulative behaviors before they pulled me back into unhealthy dynamics, and to stand firm in my authenticity without becoming defensive. Perhaps the most profound change was in my own sense of self. The crisis that had seemed so devastating had actually revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. I discovered that I could survive rejection from those whose approval I had sought my entire life. I could build a life based on my own values rather than inherited expectations. And most importantly, I could create my own definition of family. Our chosen family expanded and deepened during this time. Mark and I hosted Thanksgiving dinners and summer barbecues, gathering friends who had supported us through the crisis and new connections we made through our foundation work. These celebrations, free from the tension and judgment that had characterized my family's gatherings, became treasured traditions. My sister Emily gradually became more openly supportive as she saw that our parents had not completely cut me off after all. Her initial caution gave way to more authentic connection, and she became a regular visitor to our home, her children delighting in their cool uncles who always had art projects ready for them. Now, standing in the gallery where my new exhibition Reconciliation is about to open, I can look back on the journey with perspective I lacked during those painful moments. The text that once felt like the end of my world, locks changed. You do not have a home anymore. Ultimately led to a freedom I might never have found otherwise. My parents will attend the opening tonight. Our relationship remains complex and sometimes difficult, but it is honest in a way it never was before. They may never fully embrace all aspects of my life, but they have learned that their acceptance is not a requirement for my happiness or success. The true lesson was not about winning the battle with my parents or forcing them to accept me on my terms. It was about finding the courage to be authentically myself, regardless of their approval. It was about discovering that home is not necessarily where you grew up, but where you are truly seen and valued for who you are. If you have ever stood up for yourself against family pressure, I would love to hear your story in the comments. What gave you the strength to be authentic, despite disapproval? Has your relationship with family evolved over time? Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be accepted for who they truly are. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the most difficult challenges lead to unexpected strength and new beginnings.